Okay, welcome to Music Theory for Electronic Musicians, presented part 6. In this one, we're going to talk about the 4th and the 6th, and we talk about those together because they're related. And the 7th and the 2nd, those are also related. And then we're going to look at a couple tunes and see how they work. So the 4th and the 6th, these are not, well, when we started this class, we looked at our main goal was to look at notes that sound good together. So we looked at all the notes in a key. So how to figure out the key, the pattern for that, etc. Then we looked at all the notes that sound good when played together in, like literally together, to make chords. So we found the pattern for the diatonic chord progression. So we know all the notes that can form chords in a given key. And to do that, we used the first, the third, and the fifth from a given root note in a given key. And then eventually we used the seventh also to add, well, to show another note that can sound good in the chord, but gives it a little bit different of a quality. So we might not want to use it all the time. We skipped right over the fourth and the sixth. Because those ones are not immediately useful to us when we're building chords, but if we do a couple things to them, they are actually useful. And the weird thing about them is that we've already been using them. To make that a little more clear, basically, if you invert a fourth and invert a sixth, you get notes that we're already using. Or not notes, I should say. Intervals or scale degrees that we're already using. So let's head on over to Ableton Live and have a look at how that works. Okay, let's start here like we always do, and let's just draw in the C major scale so we can see it. So whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. We're getting pretty good at that. Okay, let's say C is our root. Let's drag that out. And now let's look at the fourth. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is. So our fourth of C is F. So what I mean by an interval we've already been using is, let's separate these. Let's just pull these out here for a second. If we go C to F, we have a fourth. We've just established that. What if we go F to C? Meaning we do this upside down. So let's make that a little easier by just shifting the C up an octave. What's our interval now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a fifth. And we know we like fifths, right? It's the first interval we looked at. Fifths are good. We need a fifth to make a chord, to make a triad anyway. So what's going on here? The thing is that any interval, when inverted, becomes another interval. It still makes a chord, because if you notice, we didn't make a C chord when we did this. We didn't make a fifth of C. We made a fifth of F. So when it's down here, F is a fourth above C, but C is a fifth above F. So the interval of a fourth can be inverted to the interval of a fifth, meaning if we look at the top note of a fourth and treat that as the root, then our interval becomes a fifth. So fourths and fifths get used a lot. Fourths get used a lot, except they look like fifths. They sound really similar. Here's the sound of a fourth. Or sorry, the sound of a fifth. And here's the sound of a fourth. It has that kind of pure, perfect quality. In fact, we call a fourth a perfect fourth, the same way that we called a fifth a perfect fifth. So our perfect intervals are fourths and fifths because they have that really open and at the same time kind of empty quality to them. So we don't use fourths to build chords very often, but we do use fifths. So the inversion of a fourth becomes a fifth. So when it comes to building chords, this is not something you need to think about all the time. You will do it if you invert the chords like we were talking about in the last lesson. You use inversions all the time to make things flow into each other nicer. You've created a bunch of fourths in there, but they're really just fifths that are inverted. So the sound is really similar between a fourth and a fifth, and if you invert them, you get the other one. So that's why we don't use fourths to build chords very often, because it's just too darn similar to the fifth. So now that we've tackled that one, let's look at, let me put these back over here. Let's look at the seventh and the second. So here's a second, right? 1, 2, 2 of these. So let's pull these out here and have a look at them. So the same pattern applies here. We don't use seconds to build chords. It's a little dissonant. Seconds can be major or minor, whereas perfect intervals like the fourth and the fifth can't be major or minor. So this is a major second we're looking at here. Sounds like that. It's a little dissonant. A minor second would be that. It's a lot dissonant. Let's go back to a major second here. What happens when we invert this interval? Based on the heading and the title of this lesson, you probably guessed, it becomes a seventh. So here's a second. What if we put the C on top? Oops. What do we have now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So a second inverts to a seventh. Remember when we were looking at seventh chords, one of the tricks I was talking about to see if it's a major or minor seventh was to look at its relationship to an octave higher of the root. So here's the root. If we put this in octave higher, it would be right here, right? So that would tell us this is a minor seventh because it's 2 notes away from the root an octave higher. If we invert it, it's a major second. So something strange just happened there, right? A major second inverts to a minor seventh. When you invert an interval that has a major or a minor quality to it, it's going to become the opposite. So a major second inverted is a minor seventh. And that's true for most of our intervals. If we invert them, they become a different number and a different quality. They either become major or minor. The only exception to that rule is the fourth and the fifth. The perfect intervals stay perfect. A perfect fourth becomes a perfect fifth because that's just the way they are. Major seconds become minor sevenths. And we haven't looked at sixths either. So let's have a quick look at sixths. So let's put these back where they belong in our little scale here. So let's use C as our root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we have a C and an A. Let's pull those out and have a look. So what's the quality of a sixth? Okay, so our sixth here is a major sixth. That's what a major sixth sounds like. And how do we know it's a major sixth? We could count our half steps and figure out how many half steps a major sixth is, but there's an easier way. If we invert it, we end up with a minor third. 1, 2, 3, 4. We know 4 half steps is a minor third. We learned that, I think, in our second lesson. So 4 half steps is a minor third, so we know that a major sixth inverts to a minor third. So we've been using minor thirds all over the place, right? And major thirds. So we have been using sixths. We just haven't inverted them. So if this is my chord and I invert it and put this on the bottom, I have a major sixth, but it's really just a third. And the sound quality is really similar. There's a huge gap here that's much smaller when it's a third, but the quality of the sound is really similar. So we can give the same kind of impression of a third through sixth. So here's a major sixth. Here's a minor sixth. And you can kind of feel how when we were looking at thirds, a major third had that kind of happy sound and a minor third had kind of a sad sound. We get the same effect here. Major, minor. So it does have a little bit of sadness to the minor sixth. So what happens when we invert a minor sixth? It becomes a major third. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when we invert a sixth or a third, it becomes the opposite and shifts quality. So a minor third inverts to a major sixth, a major third inverts to a minor sixth. So these aren't incredibly valuable things for us to know. I just wanted to be sure we touched on the role of the other intervals that we haven't talked about yet, the fourth, the sixth, and the second. So to sum up, we use them all the time. A fourth inverts to a fifth, and a fifth we use all the time. A second inverts to a seventh, and we know how to use a seventh now. And a sixth inverts to a third. And we've been using thirds for a long time. Seconds and sixths can be major or minor. Fourths can't. You can do, I should probably just mention, you can do some stuff to fourths and fifths to make them kind of major or minor, except we don't use that word. And it's a lot different because if you took a fifth, for example, and you made it minor by taking it down a half step like we do with thirds, it doesn't just make it slightly different. It makes it wildly more dissonant. So we use kind of different terms for that, and it also takes it out of key. So it's not something that we deal with all that often. So don't worry about those. Just file away that perfect intervals don't have a minor to them or a major to them. They're just perfect. They're just the way they are. They're just perfect. So seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can be major or minor. Okay, so let's look at a piece of music. So I have queued up here a tune by the band One Republic called All the Right Moves. It's kind of a big rock tune, so it's not exactly electronic, although they have done a lot of electronic stuff. But I have an odd fascination with this tune. I just really like the melody, the groove. I don't know. There's something that's really appealing to me. So let's hear the beginning, and then we're going to do a little analysis and see if we can figure out what's going on. Here we go. So, let's have a look. So what I'm mostly concerned about is this opening organ riff. That's going to really clearly tell us what's going on. So here that opening riff is again. Okay, so let's figure out what chords those are. So I've used the convert harmony to new MIDI track, and that gave me this. I cleaned it up a little bit when the Ableton algorithms do this to figure it out. Sometimes they get some extra notes in there and some artifacts like drums might throw it off and things like that. So I thinned out some stuff that just didn't belong, but this is more or less what it kicked out. So let's have a look. First, let's just hear it as is. Okay, so that sounds right. Let's look at what chords we have here. So let's focus on this first chord. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to, just for the sake of figuring out what chords we have, I'm going to get rid of duplicate notes. So here we have an A. When I mouse over it, we can see over here that it's an A. So I have an A. Here I have another A. So let's get rid of this low one because we only really need the name of the note once. Here I have an E. Okay. Here I have another A. So let's get rid of that one. Here I have a C, and here I have an E. I already had an E somewhere, right? This one? Cool. So now I'm down to just 3 notes. If we could organize these into a triad, that sure would be cool, wouldn't it? Let's try taking one of these notes down an octave, doing an inversion of it, just to get them all clumped together in a nice way. Oh, and look at that. That forms a nice little triad. We still don't know what key we're in, but if we count up notes, half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a minor third, right? And then A to E is a perfect fifth. Regardless of our key, A to E is a perfect fifth. So we know this is an A minor chord, and we don't know if it's the 1 chord or the 2 chord or the 3 chord or the 4 chord just yet. So let's just hold on to that and just know that our first chord is A minor. Now let's look at the next one. So we have a G. We have another G, so let's get rid of this low one. We have a D. We have another G. Let's get rid of that one. And we have a B. And then we have another G. We have a lot of G's in this chord. Okay, so let's move this B down an octave so we get it clumped together with everything else. Oh, and it makes another triad. So this looks an awfully lot like a triad. Let's count our half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a major triad. And G to D is a perfect fifth. In any key, we know that G to D is a perfect fifth. So we have a G major triad. So we have A minor followed by G major. So now we could start to make some guesses about our key, because by the diatonic chord progression, all we really have to do is find a situation in which A minor and G major happen. In other words, let me write this down for us. So we have major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. So we have an A minor chord somewhere and we have a G major. So if, let's say, this was A minor and this was G major, because that could happen, that would mean, or sorry, other way around. So let's say this is G major, was our 1 chord. A minor could be 2 in the key. So we could be in the key of G major. That's a reasonable hypothesis. Let's keep going and look at our third chord. There's just too many things that it could be at this point. So let's have a look. Let's see here. So our third chord, we go all the way down to the bottom here. All right, we have a C. If we go up, we have another C. So let's get rid of this low one so we can just look at the names. And we have another G, or a G, new first one for this chord. Another C, so let's get rid of that one. And an E. I think that's it. Yep. Okay, let's pull that E down to get it in the range of everything else. And we have another triad looking thing, right? So let's look at what notes these are. So let's count half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a major chord. And the fifth of C is G. So now, added to our situation over here, we also have C major. So now we need to find a situation in which C major could happen, A minor could happen, and G major could happen. So let's posit that we're in the key of C. So if C is 1, like that, then G is going to be 5. So C, D, E, F, G. Okay, so G ends up being major. That's good. A will be 6 because A comes after G, and it will be minor, we know from our chord progression. So that all works. So we could very well be in the key of C major. We have one more chord to look at, so let's do that first before we make a conclusion. So we have an F. We have another F, so let's get rid of that low one. We have an A. It looks like that's it, although we still have the C hanging around here. So the C carries over, and that's okay. So let's consider C part of our chord here. So we have C, F, A. So if we count half steps here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that doesn't make a third, a major or a minor third. A major third would be 5, a minor third would be 4. 6 is not a third. So we have an inversion happening here. So let's just try this. Let's break this note up. Just so that we can look at it on its own. Now let's see if we can organize this so that we can find a third. We can put a third in the bottom. Let's try moving our high note down. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a minor third in the bottom. That could be possible. But is F to A a fifth? F is not the fifth of A. Because if we count up just letters, A to B to C to D to E, E is the fifth of F. So we can just count up letters for these ones. And we can also see it here. A to E, that is a fifth. A to F is not a fifth. It's actually a sixth. And we know a sixth inverts to a third. So our chord properly spelled out now, and remember I didn't change any notes, I just reordered them, is FAC. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We get a major triad there, and then we have the fifth there. So now I've moved all of these to root position, and we have an F major. So let's go back and look at our thing and see if our hypothesis of C major still works. So F will be right before G. It'll be the fourth chord, and it is major. So that works. We are in the key of C major. And our chord progression is A minor to G. So A minor is the sixth chord. So we're going to do a lowercase Roman numeral. 6 to G, which is the 5 chord, to 1 to F, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 chord. So our chord progression in C major is 6, 5, 1, 4. And then it starts over again. So that works. Now here's one thing that's interesting about this, is that we haven't talked about minor keys at all yet. And this could be, and probably in all likelihood, is easier to explaining it in the key of A minor. But in order to talk about minor keys, you're going to have to wait until the next version of this class, when we get into some more advanced stuff, and we'll talk about minor keys in that class. For now, I just want to talk about major keys. So this does work perfectly well in C major. Any note you play in C major will work. As a sidebar, any note you play in A minor will also work, because A minor and C major are related. But don't let that confuse you. That is a story for another time. So in this song, we could play any note in C major, and if we analyze the melody, the notes the guy's singing, they're probably all in C major. If we looked at the chorus, we know that the chorus to this song could go to any number of these other chords, right? Let's clean this up and have a look at what else he could do here. So according to our diatonic chord progression in the key of C, we know he could do C major, D minor, E minor. So I'm just in kind of this column, I'm going up by scale degree. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And in this column, I'm going up by diatonic chord progression. So next would be F, and that's going to be major. G is major. E is minor. Oops, I can spell. A is minor. And B will be that diminished chord. And then it starts over with C major. So these are all the possible chords that could happen in the key of C major. So in this song, when we go to the chorus, what do we think happens? He probably, I don't know, he could go to E minor. He could go to D minor. You know, maybe he sticks on G major for a longer amount of time. Maybe A minor. I doubt he'll go here. Oops. I doubt he'll go to this B diminished chord. We don't really do that very often, especially in pop music. So it's not likely. But here are all the options that he could do. And this is why we're doing all this, is so that we know the different places we could go in a given key. We know what all our options are and all the notes that will sound good. So when you're making a track, you can analyze and figure out what chords will sound good given where you are. You're on this kind of chord progression. So we know this is the other places we could go. Or, and I can't emphasize this enough, you could say, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go to a D major. You know, D minor is in key, and that's the one that we want. But what if I went to a D major? Screw the rules. I don't care. I'm just going to go to D major. You're going to break the system. You're going to do something out of key. But if you always do everything in key, you're going to create perfectly fine sounding and perfectly boring music. So sometimes you want to break the rules in order to do something that sounds a little edgy and a little fun. So don't let the rules hold you down. If you find you're in a situation where you're like, oh man, I really want to go to D major here, but it's just not in key, so I kind of can't. But I really think it would sound good. Then forget the rules. Go to D major. That's the most important thing. You're the composer. You can do whatever you want. You're the producer. The rules are not as important as your gut and what you think sounds good. All good music throughout history has been good because it broke the rules of music theory. These are really just kind of guidelines for what we like to hear when everything is just fine and normal. So don't be afraid to break the rules. Okay, with that, I will wrap up this lesson. And thanks for taking part in the class. And hopefully we will see you in the advanced version of this class. We still have a ton of stuff to cover. We've only scratched the surface. We still have minor keys, all kinds of different stuff. We haven't even talked about rhythm or ninth chords or 13th chords or anything like that. There's tons more stuff to do. But hopefully this gets you on your way to making some cool new tunes, incorporating some new harmonies, new melodies, and maybe understanding a little bit more about what's going on. So thanks for taking the class, and we will talk to you soon. Adios.